Hello and welcome to the channel. Recently, I've been talking about what design tokens are, why developers should care about them, and how developers can use them. And I'm going to link to two of my articles where I went into detail about this. So if you have the time, check them out in the description section. You can read them to learn more about design tokens. Today, we're taking it to a different level. I'm going to show you how to take those design tokens that your design team worked really hard on and turn them into an NPM package that every developer on every team can consume, whether they're building a web app, they're building an iOS, and so on. So no more copying color values, border values, all those tiny details that cause drifts between design intention and what is eventually implemented in code. So there's just one source of truth for everyone to reference. And just before we start, you need a few things ready to go. So you need Figma. I will be using the Figma desktop app, but you can use the browser web app if you want. You also need the Token Studio plugin on Figma. You need Node.js on your machine, your computer, and an NPM account. You need a GitHub account and you need an IDE code editor. I will be using Visual Studio Code, and you need some JavaScript knowledge. You don't have to know much, but knowing how JavaScript works will definitely help you. One more thing before we get started is that your design and development teams need to align on a standard. I will recommend the Design Tokens Community Group Standard. Without a standard, you might find that when you move your tokens from one tool to another, say Figma to Style Dictionary, things might start breaking. So you might run into naming conflicts, type mismatches, broken token references, just a lot of things that you would have to manually clean up. So it's important to have this conversation with your design team early, ideally before the design tokens are created. However, that is not usually what happens. So I would say catch the issues early so that you can both align. Any refactoring to the naming that needs to happen can happen, and then the tokens are ready for developer use. So this is what the flow ideally would look like. We start in Figma variables, since most design teams using Figma would have their design tokens as variables. Then we import them into the Token Studio plugin, which we will be installing on Figma. Then we sync to GitHub as JSON. So the tokens are exported as JSON into a GitHub repository. And then we pull that repo locally and we can now do our transformation. So we transform with Style Dictionary, which I'll be showing us. And then once the transformation is done, we package, publish to NPM. And developers can import the package to be used everywhere. So it's design, sync, transform, publish, use, as simple as that. So first up, we need to get our tokens into Token Studio. So this is a very powerful tool for managing design tokens. We're using this plugin to export the variables already defined in Figma as JSON and store them in a GitHub repository. So I'm here in Figma and I have my variables set up. And these are the variables that I will be importing into Token Studio. If you don't have variables, but you still want to follow along, you can check out the sample variables I linked to in the description section. It has 3 files with 3 different JSON objects that you can copy into the Token Studio plugin. So you can see from my Figma variables that I have 3 levels of tokens set up. I have my option tokens, which are my core styles, my semantic tokens, where I start to give intent to the option tokens, and then I have my component level tokens. The order matters here because in a real world setup, you can expect to see hundreds of tokens in some cases, but I've kept it really small because my intention here is just to show us a walkthrough and not really what a design token setup should look like, or at least a design token setup you can expect in a production environment. Okay, now I'm going to close Figma variables and I'm going to navigate to the Actions section. If this is your first time using this plugin, go to Plugin and Widgets, you search for Token Studio, you should see this plugin come up and you can just click it. And once it loads, you can click the new empty file option. It pre-populates with an empty token set, but you can just go ahead and delete that since we don't need it. And instead, what I am going to do is that I am going to import the Figma variables already defined into Token Studio. To do that, I'm going to come to this section that says styles and variables and import variables. I can select a couple of options here. The first one is to convert numbers to dimensions. So if I select this, then numbers imported will be converted to pixels. If I want them to be converted to rem, I can also select this, but I don't want that. Now it shows me the variables available in my Figma file. This is automatically populated and I want all of them. You can, if there are some variables you don't want imported, you can uncheck them. Just be careful to ensure that you are not unchecking the alias variables. For example, if your components reference your semantics, you have to import both the semantics and the component. If you uncheck the semantics, then whatever you're importing in components will be broken. So I need everything. I'm just going to go ahead and check all of them just to make sure that they are all included in my styles and tokens. So as you can see, all my tokens are now imported into Token Studio. And for the sizes, for the dimensions, I mean, you can see that they are in pixels. If you don't have Figma variables, what you can do is you can just create new sets manually. So come here, click this, create a new set. For the first one, you can name it options because we're working with the JSON I shared in the GitHub repository. And when you create each set, you can come here to this icon and just paste the JSON. So everything in here is represented as JSON, and that is what we're going to eventually export to GitHub. And if you want to see how to do this step by step, you can read the blog post in my description section. I go through this process with screenshots included. Now that we have our token set up in Token Studio, the next step is to set up the GitHub repository where we will be syncing the tokens. And to do that, we have to go to GitHub. So I'm in GitHub and now I have to set up the repository where my tokens will live. So I'm going to come here, click new, and I'm just going to name mine hero tokens because most of the tokens I set up here are for a hero section. I don't have to enter a description, but I do need a README, and that is because Token Studio would not push to an empty repository. So the README just adds a file that we can work with. What else? I'm going to make this private. There are no specific requirements. You can have your repository public or private. That's up to you. Great. And now I have my repository to work with. The next thing I'm going to do is generate a token. So I'm going to click on my avatar, go to settings. From here, I go to developer settings, personal access tokens, and I'm presented with two options. I can either go with fine-grained tokens or the classic tokens. I'm going to select fine-grained tokens. So I'm just going to click to generate a new token. I'm going to name this token hero token. I'll just give for my tutorial. I'm going to leave the expiration at 30 days and I'm just going to select for this specific repository, which is hero tokens. Great. Now I need to add permissions. Token Studio requires read and write permissions for creating and editing token stored in my repository. So I'm going to search for the contents permission, which is what we need. And I'm going to give it read and write access. And I believe that's all we need. I'm just going to go ahead and generate this token. Generate. Awesome. So I'm just going to copy this and store it somewhere. With my repository set up and my token generated, all that's left is to go back to Token Studio and complete our sync. We're back in Figma and we have the Token Studio plugin open. So we're just going to go to the settings page and here we can see the option to add a new sync provider, which is GitHub for us. So I'm going to choose GitHub, but from the list available, you can see that there are so many to work with. I'm going to name this hero tokens and I will paste in my personal access token. Under repository, I'll paste in my owner / repo name. So for me, that's my full name hero token. So you can get this by just copying the GitHub URL of the repository and just removing the first part. And for branch, we're going to enter main. Note that you can only use main if you're using the free version of the plugin. If you want to be able to push to a different branch, you want a multi-branch workflow, that is a pro feature. We also select the storage location for our tokens. If you're on the free plan, then that can only be one file. So I'm going to go with token.json. If you are on the paid plan, then you can break your tokens up into multiple files. And I'm just going to go ahead and save. And with this, Token Studio is officially connected to the repository. So at this point, we can go ahead and push all the tokens we've created, or we can go back and make changes if needed. So if we go into this, we can see everything that is new, which is basically all the tokens we just imported from Figma variables. And I'm just going to commit them. I'm going to enter a simple message of initial comment. The branch, of course, is main, and I'm just going to push that. Done. Now, when I come into GitHub and I reload the page, yes, I should see my token. So we have the tokens.json file here. And if I click it, I expect to see all the 3 levels of my tokens that were in Figma in one big JSON object. So we officially have our GitHub Token Studio sync, and we can push changes from Token Studio to GitHub. In the same way, if changes are made to the repository, we can also pull those changes into Figma using the Token Studio plugin. Now, before we get to transforming the tokens into tools that developers can use, we also need to set up an NPM account. So if you don't have an NPM account, please go to npmjs.com, set up an account. You can also choose to publish your package directly under your account or under an organization. So if you want to use an organization, after creating your account, also create an organization on npm.js. Now, for our workflow to be effective, we have to set up automated deployments to the package. What do I mean by this? When a designer makes a change to the tokens and pushes to GitHub, that should also trigger a deployment of a new version of the package so that any product or any app consuming that package will get the latest versions of the token. And we're going to do this using trusted publishing. So trusted publishing is a way to enable automated deployments to NPM from GitHub. Before we go into NPM to set up trusted publishing, we need to deploy a sort of placeholder package. And that's because you cannot set up trusted publishing without an existing package. So I found this really handy tool from someone called Azu. You can check out their work, and it's called Setup NPM Trusted Publish. And it's just a way to quickly set up and publish a package to npm.js before you're ready to actually build out the package. So it's just publish something for a placeholder, set up trusted publishing, and then after building out the proper package, you can push it as needed. And the first thing you need to do, if you haven't yet, is to log into npm on your terminal. So if you do npm login, that should take you through the login flow. So I click enter, and that takes me to the browser to log in. The entire login process happens in the browser, and once it's done, you should be able to see this success message that says logged in on the registry. The next thing you need to do is to install the setup npm trusted publish package. So that's with this command npm install global setup npm trusted publish, and I'm just going to click enter. And once that is added, the next step is to create the package. So the command is setup npm trusted publish space the package name. So if you have an organization that you want to publish the package within, you would start with the name of the organization. So for me, I have an organization called Jen's Demo. So I'm going to start with that. But if not, you can just start with the specific name for the package. I'm going with an organization though. So I'm going to do @Jen's Demo / then I type in the name of the package itself. And that's going to be hero tokens. Click enter. And here I have a success message. Now when I go into npm.js, I can see that the package has been published, and if I click into it, I can see the details. And this was published 3 minutes ago. So with the package created, we're ready to set up trusted publishing. So to set up trusted publishing, I have to go to the settings page. For our workflow, we're going with GitHub Actions. So I'm going to select that. Then I enter my organization and user. I am publishing this from my personal GitHub account. So I'm going to enter my GitHub username and then the name of my repository, which is hero tokens. And I'm going to also enter the name of my workflow file. For this, we will be using release.ynl. Really, that's all we need. So I can just go ahead and set up connection. So with trusted publishing setup, the next step is to clone our repository and start converting the tokens. So I'm back here in my repository and I'm just going to copy the web URL, and this is what I will be using to clone this repo locally. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a package.json file, and we're going to do that by running npm on it. And for the utility walkthrough, I'm going to enter a few custom information, and then everything else I will just leave to auto-generate. So the first thing is the package name. I want my package name to be specific to what is on npm.js, not the name of the repository. So here I'm going to type in the name of the published package, which is jsdemo/hero tokens, yes. And for version, I'm going to enter 0.0.1. For description, I can just leave that as blank for now. But if you want to enter a description, you can just go ahead and do that. And I think I'm going to accept the defaults for everything else. Great. So I have my package.json now. As you can see, the name is here and the version is 0.0.1. And if I have any reason to, I can always come back and make changes here. Next thing I'm going to do is create a git ignore file, and I just have one thing that would go into that, and that is load modules. So next we're going to install 3 different packages. The first is style dictionary, which is what actually builds and outputs our tokens into whatever format we need, such as CSS or JavaScript objects or whatever you need. We're also going to install the Token Studio ST Transform package, which basically helps Style Dictionary understand the format of the tokens that are coming from Token Studio. And finally, we're going to import TypeScript to ensure that everything we create and export has proper typing. So to install all these packages at once, just run the command you see here, npm -d, because we are importing these as dev dependencies. So we have Style Dictionary, Token Studio, SD Transform, and TypeScript. I'm just going to run that. Okay, so we can now see those packages in our dev dependencies. The next thing we're going to do is make some manual edits to the package.json file. The first update would be to set type to module. So I'm just going to do that under description. I'm going to update main to an index.cjs file that will be created in the dist folder. I'm also going to set module to an index.js file that will also be in the dist folder. And I'm going to set types to an index.d.ts file that will also be in the dist folder. Hey, I'm also going to set the exports, and these are basically what devs would be able to import from the package. So in my exports, which I have added here, and you can just copy. So we have the variables.css file, which is where all the transform tokens will be as CSS variables, and they can be imported and used to style the app. We would also have a JSON object with all the tokens in JSON format, and then the raw tokens.json file, which is what is pushed directly from Figma. Next, I'm adding my files, which specifies what gets published to the npm package, so that stays clean and lightweight. And I just have the dist folder, the tokens.json file, the readme, and the license, which is really all anybody needs to use this package. Next, I am updating my script. So I will not be running any tests here. If you want to implement tests, that's something you can work on. But for the purpose of this video, I'm not going to test anything. All I'm going to do is add the scripts needed to build, watch, and run a pre-published only action. I'm also going to add a few details that are not necessary for this to work, but could help user experience with your package. So I'm going to add the author name, and I'm just going to type Jen Offer Codes. For description, I'm going to just say design tokens from our design system. This obviously can be more detailed. And if anybody wants to report bugs, we can put a link to the issues page directly so they have access to that. We also need the homepage of the repository, so I'm going to paste that in. And I believe this is all we need for now. Now, to transform our tokens, I'm going to create a file in the root folder called sd.config.js. And I'm just going to paste this in here. You can find this code in the repo I have linked in the description section. And I'm just going to walk you through what is happening here. So we are loading the we're loading the tokens from a JSON file. That's tokens.json that was pushed from Figma. And our tokens are organized in 3 levels. As you can see, we have the options, we have the semantics, and we have the component tokens. And our options are the base primitives like the colors and the spacing, and semantics are where we start to give meaning to them, like primary color, referencing a color in the options token. And the components are the actual component level tokens that we want to export to our developers. And in some cases, you would even have the designers tell you that they do not want to expose the options tokens and the semantics tokens to developers because it might be too much context, or they just don't believe that it's necessary. In some cases, it could also be because there are just too many tokens available and you really want to narrow it down to what your developers actually need. Now, one thing you need to know is that depending on how you set up your tokens in Token Studio, the setup might look, or the nesting might look different. So for example, because we loaded our tokens from Figma variables, we get this experience where we have the options being nested under options, semantics being nested under semantics. I've had a different experience where I set up my tokens inside Token Studio and this nesting was not there. So I've set this up to accommodate both, or you may need to do some more transforms if depending on how your team has defined your tokens or where you've defined those tokens. Now we have a deep merge function here, and what we're doing is we're merging the options and semantics as a base layer because when components reference the semantic tokens and semantic tokens reference the options tokens, then Style Dictionary needs to see the whole chain to resolve those references correctly. And this deep merge kind of preserves the nested structure so that we do not lose the hierarchy. And after merging the tokens, we filter everything to just the components. So that's why we have only components here. And we don't want to export our base primitives, like I mentioned earlier, just the component level design tokens. Next, we have a custom name transform. And by default, our tokens will be named something like components, buttons, background color. But we don't want that. We want to be able to remove the components prefix because we're copying variables from Figma. We're not going to have that prefix, so we want to remove it here before it is exported. So this transform kind of strips that out and gives us the clean names, for example, button, background, color. That's all we need. We also have this custom formatter here called extract components from tokens, and we're basically using this to remove a bunch of metadata that Style Dictionary would add to a token, like the original name, attribute, path, and type. We're explicitly skipping all of that. We only care about the actual value property, which contains our resolved design value, or design token value, I should say. So this gives us a clean nested object with just the data that our developers will eventually need. What you strip away and what you preserve is really dependent on your team and what they need. So just keep that in mind. And finally, we are exporting to 3 platforms. We have the CSS variables in a root selector, a nested JSON file, and both ESM and CommonJS JavaScript modules. Each one uses our custom formatter to output only the component tokens in the right format. So the end result would be clean, component scoped design tokens that your developers can import and use without any extra baggage. So now it's time to transform our tokens and create the dist folder. So if I run npm run tokens build, I should get the JSON file created, the index.js and index.cjs files created, as well as the variables.css files. And we can see in that we now have a dist folder with some things in it. So if I go into variables.css, we're able to see all our variables in a root selector, and these are all the tokens that were defined in the component level as CSS variables. We can also check out the JSON object, and this can also be applied to styling as needed. We also have the exports in the CJS file as well as the JS file. So with our tokens transformed, the next thing I'm going to try to do is to make this TypeScript friendly. So we can add type definitions to get autocomplete and also to add type safety, and I'm going to be doing this. So first, in the dist JSON folder, I'm going to create a new file, components.d.ts, and I'm just going to paste this in. You can also find this in the repo linked. Also at the root of the dist folder, I'm going to create a new file. I'm going to name that index.d.ts, and I'm going to paste this in. Now that's it with transforming our tokens. We have them ready to export. So the next step is to create our release process. Now this release process is what will support pushes from Figma, triggering a release of the latest version of the token. So the first thing we need to do is to install semantic release. I'm going to do that by running npm ni semantic release. So with semantic release installed, the next thing we're going to do is to create the release.yml file, and that goes into a GitHub folder. So at the root, I'm going to create a new file, and that's going to be /workflows/workflows/release.yml. Awesome. And in this file, I'm just going to paste in this config. The only thing you would need to change here is your scope. So your scope should be the name of your organization. Mine is Gent Demo, but you should change it to yours. So with the release workflow done, we're ready to push our updated package to NPM or to the NPM registry. One thing you should note is that using semantic release, your commit messages matter. That is actually what determines if your commit is going to trigger a deployment or not. You can read the semantic release documentation to learn more, but basically your commit should always be prefixed with feed, fix, or breaking change. And that also impacts the version that your package will respond to. This is something you should communicate to whoever is managing the tokens in Figma, because if they want to make a commit and they want it to reflect on the package that developers are consuming, they have to use the right commit message structure. So for me, I'm going to use the feeds because I am adding the transformations for the first time. And I like to work in Visual Studio UI, but you can work in the terminal if you want. So I'm just going to enter my commit message, which is feeds, and I'll say initial token transformation. And I'm just going to add, taking a quick look to make sure I want everything here committed, yes. And I'm just going to add then and commit. I'm going to push that. Now back in GitHub, I can see that my token deployment failed, and I'm going to try and figure out what happened. Okay, so that took me a while to figure out, but it turns out I had automatically installed a version of semantic release that did not support trusted publishing as it works right now. And so what I had to do was upgrade to 25.0.1. That should be in the repo I'll be sharing with you, but just keep that in mind. That was why my deployment failed. But now that it's ready, and you can see here that the workflow run was successful. And if we go to npm and refresh on your own and you'll be able to see that everything has been published. So if I go to the code, remember we specified what files should be exported, and that is now available here. So we have the dist folder, we have the readme, the package.json, and the tokens.json. And if I open the dist folder and I go into CSS, variables.css, you can see all the variables that we were able to transform from the tokens. This is basically ready for use. I'm not going to go into details of how I use the variables or the JSON objects, but I just want to show you what it looks like when I import this package into a project and check out the variables shared. So I have this project I've been working on building a few components, and I'm just going to use it to demonstrate how we can use this package. So as you can see in the terminal, I have run npm I demo/hero tokens, and that has been added. If you come to my package.json, you should be able to see this in my dependencies, and this is version 1. And you can also see the exported files under the node modules. So we have the CSS, for example, all the variables of CSS are here. Now in my app, I can import the CSS variables, for example, and you can see how I have imported Jen's demo hero tokens CSS variables.css. This is one of the exports from the package. We can also import the JSON objects if needed. But when I import this, what happens is that root selector with all the variables from the package will now be available for every element in my app. So here's a simple example. If I click on this element, I should be able to see all the variables in the root because I have imported the variables.css file. So let me just give this a quick style of width 200 and height 200. And I'm doing this so that we can test out the variables. And then background color, I'm going to do var, or I'll just copy this, right? That's plagiarizing. That works. So we can also use other formats of our exports. It's not just restricted to CSS. I just noticed I didn't close this, but it worked anyway, thankfully. Can also import the tokens like this. And I think it's very important to document what can be imported in your README so that the developers who are consuming your package know exactly what is available. And if we go ahead to change this and do tokens.hero.background, that should also work. So we can see in the element style, when this is selected, that we have the RGB value here. So there are many ways you can transform your tokens to be used. It depends on what your developers are building and as a result, what their needs are. Now, finally, I want to answer the question of, okay, so how do designers continue to update these tokens? So I want to show that using Token Studio. Ideally, the designer can make the updates in Figma variables, import it into Token Studio, and then push to GitHub. We spent a lot of time already, so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to directly edit the JSON here. So under colors, I'm just going to add a red. I'm going to do red. So I'm just going to give it 500 in value of this and a type of color. Great. This needs a comma and that's saved. So when I go back, I can see that we now have a red. And by the way, every update you make to Token Studio can also be exported to Figma variables. So you can make the changes either way. That works. Now, when I make a change or when I import a change, you see that this push to GitHub button becomes active and it kind of has like a notification that something has changed. So if I click this, then I'm able to make a comment. And again, depending on what you want, if you want this to trigger a redeployment, you structure your commit message to inform semantic release of that. So I want this to be released. So I'm going to prefix my commit message with a fix and say adding red option. And I'm going to push that. And here we go. All done. So let's check out GitHub and see what is happening there. So I didn't catch the workflow running, but if we go to GitHub, we can see that that commit triggered a deployment, and this has been pushed to the package. So if we come to the package, we should see a red here. Yes, so we have the red in the options token. So you can see it's pretty easy for your designers to commit changes. They just have to know what to prefix with. So that's the whole flow. This is a complete automated workflow that can take your design tokens from living in an isolated file to something that developers working across multiple products can consume to make design decisions. Of course, there's a lot more customization you could do. Definitely have to create a proper README document. You might want to be more strict with typing, and there are so many configurations you can do to make this ideal for your team. But I hope that this serves as a great starting point. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section. I'll try to help out as much as I can. And if you like this, please subscribe to my channel. I will be sharing a lot more around front end and design collaboration and a lot of handy guides. Thank you for watching.